You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. The podcast that I like to say likes to embrace mental wellness topics, not mental health, but mental wellness from a fresh, salient, forward-thinking perspective to focus on things that often people don't want to think about until they're in dire straits. I'm hoping the narrative that you're hearing, not just about the pandemic, but you're hearing more and more people speak about the challenges of their mental wellness and how it's legitimately affecting their performance. The latest would be Simone Biles. Before that, it was Naomi Osaka. And the list goes on. And my whole purpose of this podcast, I know that talking about mental health, that's why we refer to this as mental wellness, is not sexy. We know this. But is to help you to pull back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage that plagues so many of us in our lives, and to help you to identify those ambitions and harness the motivation to help you to get the satisfaction that you seek in your everyday life. I keep telling people, if you do the work before you get into difficult situations, you'll navigate the waters better. Now, does it mean it's going to be easy? No. But you'll have a better command of your emotion and where you're mentally at if you do the work. I always tell people, look at mental wellness like you do your physical health. Just like you do a checkup every year. Hopefully you're one of those people that are doing those follow-ups to check up on your every year. There's certain things, you reach a certain age, certain things you have to do. If you're doing those things, you're trying to maintain a healthy life and to stay ahead of any type of disease. Whereas you have people who don't, and they find that they have something wrong, and all of a sudden it becomes a worse situation because they refuse to be preventative. I want you to look at M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, as preventative mental wellness. That's how I want you to think about this show. So if you happen to be a first-time listener or viewer, well, welcome. I always say buckle up for safety because occasionally it can be an unexpected bumpy ride. I may say something that you've never considered. I think today's conversation about, understanding the value of relationships may make you reflect on some things that maybe you hadn't thought about. And you may say, it becomes pensive for you. But of course, if you are a frequent flyer, you listen to the show all the time, I always appreciate your support. So I always say, if you're that returning, viewer or listener, welcome back. As always, grab a pencil and paper. Maybe you can jot down something that might jar a thought for you. Grab your beverage of choice. It could be water. I'm trying to hydrate, coffee, beer, wine. It's 5:00 somewhere. And welcome to my listeners in Dubai, Morocco, San Francisco, Toronto, Montreal. I love the fact that a lot of people are tuning into the show from a global standpoint. So thank you for sharing and subscribing to my Facebook and YouTube pages. I really appreciate that. But there's a rule I have about M.A.Y.A. There are 49 episodes. You are to work at this podcast at your pace. Discover the process through the episodes. Remind you, I'm not here. This is not a therapy session. This is me being your friendly mental wellness advocate, sharing content with you that can help you work on your mental wellness. And if you get to a point and you feel like you might need something additional because maybe all of a sudden you discovered something through one of my episodes, that's when I say, perhaps it's time for you to see a professional to kind of work through that issue you might have. So by no means is this ever advice. This is purely sharing information to get you thinking outside the box about mental wellness. So for that next 60 minutes, hopefully you're in a place where you can listen to the show. Maybe you're listening to it as a podcast on another platform. Whatever it is, take the time to reflect and use this time for you because this show is about you and nothing else. So we're into episode 49, and I love this. Assigning value to your relationships. You can always join this conversation pretty simply. If you're watching via YouTube or Facebook, just type something into the comment section, and you can click on it, and I will share it with everybody. I will read it just in case you're just listening, or if you're a viewer, you'll see it appear right there on the screen. Some housekeeping stuff before we jump into episode 49. Remember, you can always find episodes of M.A.Y.A on M.A.Y.A.com. Just when you get there, remember, I always have podcast companions. So in this particular episode, I have kind of this worksheet exercise to help you understand values. And if you're struggling with pinpointing what that means, the exercise will help you to get to the bottom of what does value mean for you? And we're going to really pull this apart and be very semantic about it. But I think once you understand when I talk about value in your relationship, because there are high value relationships and low value relationships, and they are not all created equal, That workshop sheet will really help you to kind of figure out some things. Also, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. You're going to type in M.A.Y.A. You're going to scroll down past all the Japanese anime, and boom, you're going to find me right there. But of course, if you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, I hold no grudges. I appreciate the support either way. You can find me on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify, and a couple others that are just out there. So all you have to do is search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And of course, right there, you can listen to all 49 episodes. And by now, hopefully you are getting social with me, which means you are following me on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai and Facebook, M.A.Y.A Akai Presents. So those are all the ways that you can connect with the show, and always like, subscribe, and share. Because I always tell people, maybe this episode isn't something that's doing anything for you, but it doesn't mean you might not know someone who could use a little insight to the situation they're in. So I'm not saying to share for just shameful self-promotion. I'm saying share because just because it doesn't do something for you right now, it may help someone else that you know. So, as always, getting into the show, there's James O'Bannon throwing a wave up there. Hello. Just like that, you can share and be a part of the show by doing it that way. Okay. Toolbox time, something we do pretty much consistently. You always take out your emotional intelligence. If you're new to the show, okay, maybe you don't know that. But if you aren't, emotional intelligence is the most important thing that you have in your toolbox that we consistently work on. And you know that emotional intelligence is that ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions, but not just yours, others. And there's levels to EI. I'm going to tell you that. It may start with just you getting connected with you. But as you get connected with you, you will begin to understand and be open to embracing how other people are feeling as well. Something else I share that we'll be doing throughout the podcast. This is the theme for 2021. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Aristotle, as you know, a Greek philosopher. This is what this show is about, because when you understand you, when you gain wisdom with you, the most important relationship you have is with you. It isn't with anybody else. When you are solid and center with yourself, everything else tends to fall in place. And people who take the time and energy to do that will say, I will co-sign on this. I approve this message. You're right. Because the minute I got right with me, I was able to get right with other people. Now, just in case I happen to be saying something that's resonating with you, and occasionally I've been known to do that, and I'm not being pretentious when I say that, I created something several episodes ago called M.A.Y.A's Mailbag. I got people who would send me emails and ask me questions about an episode they're listening to. So if you're back in episode 35 and you have this aha moment or a question, or you want to be like, hey, M.A.Y.A, you said this, I don't know how I feel about that. I want more insight. I will respond to your email, and or if it's really worth conversation, I'll create an episode around it. So hence, I created a segment called M.A.Y.A's Mailbag. So you can send me a virtual letter about an episode if it's got you thinking, reflecting on how, to navigate a difficult situation, or it just made you think about something you want to question, or hey, if you're feeling stuck and you want to work towards getting that best version of yourself, but you got to get out of that position you're stuck in, just send me a virtual letter, i.e. an email, with your thoughts or questions to getinspired@mayaakai.com. Just send an email, whatever it is, reference the episode so I can kind of know what you were looking into, to getinspired@mayaakai.com. And I'll go ahead and share. I pull a couple off the mailbag I did last week. I'll do a couple letters, one or two next week in that show, when people pose some things to me that I think are really worthy of kind of sharing the question, because if it's on your mind, it might be on someone else's as well. All right. So that's all our housekeeping things we have to do before we jump into the show. Let's jump into episode 49, assigning value to your relationships. And I kind of did a similar episode to this mini back, but I really felt like some things are always worthy of revisiting because they really have a very salient message. And relationships, which for us is the core of our being in most situations, whether it be that most important relationship you have with yourself or whether it be with others. Understanding relationship dynamics are so important. Here's what you have to know out the bat. All relationships are not created equal. Every relationship has its own unique place and time of origin. So when you might have met someone and where it started doesn't mean that's where it's at. And every relationship has a purpose and a function. What's more important is the level of energy, focus, and time applied to a relationship ultimately is related to the value that the respective person feels that it has. And there's a lot of factors that go into relationships that make it very integral and how you perceive the value. Some of those factors may include, like I said, the time spent, the duration of the length of the relationship, the emotional and mental connections. Sometimes for people, it's physical proximities, attraction, Or it may be something that's really driven by purpose and function. Despite whatever the factors are, there's one aspect of relationships that are so important and are front and center, and it's deciding its value. And that value that it's decided upon comes directly from you. So you know me, everything has to have a working framework so we can know we're speaking from a position of we understand when I say relationship, what it means. If I say purpose and function, what does it mean? I want a clear understanding because you can't make good concrete decisions about what's valuable if you don't put things within respective context. You know how bad it is when you put things out of context. So imagine how things unfold when you give them context. So let's start simple. What is a relationship? Okay. I would tell you the meaning, if you look it up online, I'm always literal, is defined kind of in two ways. A relationship is the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, a state of being connected. So we know that relationships refer to connectivity. It also expands that definition by saying the way in which two or more people or groups, it made it purely about people and groups and removed objects, because people can really have relationships to objects. But that's kind of an odd conversation and we can dive into it a little bit later. But it's the way in which two or more people or groups regard and behave towards each other. I'm going to say this. The key word in that second part of the definition is the way that people behave. But more important, the word regard legitimately is the strong part of that conversation. And there's different types of relationship. And this is the thing about valuing. So there are 5 basic or core types of relationships that exist. There's family relationships, there's friendships, and friendships are relationships. We just give them special words. Friend, taking out relation. There's acquaintanceships, people you meet that you wouldn't say you have deep, meaningful relationships, but they maybe have some type of interaction or frequency in your life. And there's romantic relationships. We know about those, partners, marriage, things of that nature. And I'd say there's that other domain, and there's that work relationships do exist. Relationships with your boss, relationships with your peers, maybe relationships with a contractor. So there's different relationships and interactions that exist. Each of these relationships have different value. How you value your family is probably not the same as you value your friends. And the funny thing is, don't ever assign value and say, well, if it's a family relationship, it must be more important than a friendship. Absolutely not, because you have some people who have really poor and not quality relationships with family, and their friendship is where they put more of their value when it comes to connectivity and having support. So don't assume that what's valuable for you may be valuable for someone else. You have to look at this in a silo, what you value to be important. But no matter what the relationship it is, the value is going to be different, and even the purpose and the function is going to be different. We'll get into the value a little bit later, but let's talk about purpose. Let's put this in a framework. Purpose can be defined as the reason for in which you do something or something is created to exist. So it's purpose. So an example of purpose would be, we're scheduling this meeting today to talk about relationships. That's the purpose of this particular podcast. Give it to you like that. On the flip side, if you were to say, well, then what is function? Because they seem very interchangeable. Function is an activity or purpose that's intended for a person or thing. So an example would be, because they seem very similar, the function of a car is to get you to the desired destination. Interesting enough, in some relationships, purpose and function is easily to identify. For instance, a work relationship. The purpose of a job, straight out, is to earn an income, whether you love it or hate it. The function of a job is you earn money at work to spend on your living expenses. Different, but very similar. And I'm not going to really jump into why you must, I don't need you to overthink about purpose and function. I just want you to know within relationships, it's going to have a purpose and or a function. And sometimes in difficult relationships, you need to understand what that means, especially when you're talking about boundaries. So outside of purpose and function, which do have legitimate importance, it's the value conversation of relationships that this is all about. So what does value mean? I'm going to get into semantics again. Value really has 2 different existence, and most people don't think about it this way. And this is how I want you to start to think about your relationships. If you think about value as a noun, That's the way you regard something. It's deserved, it's important, it has worth, it's useful. So if you used it as a noun in a sentence, it'd be the value to this is money. Value is the focus. But on the flip side, when you talk about value as a verb, it's applying the action to considering. It's an action at that point. So it's important that it has beneficial or high opinion of something. So you say, I'm valuing this opinion, which means it's the act of doing something. So I value this, but I'm valuing. So it's more about the action. And it's interesting because we can jump like legitimately like into a real talk time, because this is where the conversation can be heavy and people don't want to think about it. Like, I've never thought about how I looked at my relationships with people if I just value them as a person opposed to as an actual being versus the value that they bring to something. Do you, and this is our first real talk time, do you value a person before you realize their value to you or your relationship? And people are very frequently guilty of this. Let's say, for instance, we will maybe instantly, I'm going to give you a complicated one, and I hope I don't strike a nerve with anybody. Remember, I'm not your therapist. I'm just here to like kind of make interesting conversation and get your wheels thinking about your mental wellness. And relationship dynamics, especially with families, can be complicated. We are taught that our parents are value. We are taught without them ever giving good parenting necessarily, and we may not even know what good parenting looks like. We instantly value our parents because it's a role that instantly is of importance. We value them. And down the road, as you experience parenting, how you choose to value them, it may be different, because all of a sudden, let's say if you were neglected or abused, or on the flip side, you were nurtured, elevated, celebrated, you will value your parents in a different way than just the idea that the role of a parent has value, if that makes any sense. And this is why the relationship conversation can be really difficult when you talk about value. But a lot of us give people value instantly in our lives without realizing, do they really have value? Seems kind of oxymoronic, but if you think about it, it makes sense. But here's the thing I want you to think about in this real talk time moment. Do you find, and this is before maybe you were enlightened because you're listening to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. That's a joke. Do you find that you assign value without considering if it's appropriate? So here's the thing, especially within, let's say, family or romantic relationships, we tend to do. We may assign value to and love and respect and understanding and time and energy. Oh, and here's a big one, and emotional and mental space to relationships, aka people, that have not proven they are worthy of it, assigned value parent, or they don't reciprocate what you need or expect. Now, I'm going to put a caution on this. Caution, Will Robinson, caution, I swear. And this is really important. I use the word expect with great caution because expectations should be established and never assumed. Do not behave as if people are mind readers. Be clear about what you need in a relationship and what you would like to have. Wants. Needs are always more important than wants. But we have a tendency, it's human nature, to want and get the wants first, and then the needs come later. And you know what the problem with that is? Often, in most cases, your relationship will fall apart because needs have to be met before wants. And all of a sudden, you might get what you want, but not what you need. And now you're really unhappy because you never should have proceeded in that fashion in the first place. Different relationships may have different value, and what you need and want should match in accordance. So for instance, you should never expect from an acquaintanceship, someone that you just have a random friendship with, maybe you're in a circle of friends and you're not close to a certain person, as the person that you assign the title of my best friend. So I always tell people, never make the assumption that somebody understands the nature of your personality, especially if you're kind of like chips passing in the night. And I don't mean that in a weird sexual way either. You see a person occasionally in a social circle, they say hello, and you actually can engage in conversation. So you don't feel like strangers. But because that's like you're a step above being strangers, you're now acquaintances because you've seen each other enough to know each other. But friendships have deeper dynamics to them because a person who is your friend knows more about you than an acquaintance does. A person who is your friend knows what matters, what's important to you. They know your goals, expectations. I mean, and here's the next thing to that. Even friendships have level because you may have a person who was an acquaintance who becomes your friend and you're getting to know each other, but you regard them higher as just someone that you just, see occasionally. So even within friendships, there is an interesting kind of level to it. And I think it's important, and I learned a hard lesson on this. Make sure that when you have friendships with people, that you don't assign importance or key information about yourself to low-level relationships. Because it could come back to bite you if that relationship doesn't, or that friendship more so, does not pan out the way you thought it was. Be mindful. There's levels to this. And that's what people don't get. We often want to fast track through friendships because it's fun. We connect with somebody. We're having fun. We have similar interests. It seems like things are super cool. You're like, man, we resonate. I was thinking the same thing. Don't overthink or overassign value to something because it feels good or it feels natural, because there's a danger in that. But when something feels good to us as being humans, we tend to want to get all up in it. I mean, it's just who we are. It's not bad, but think about the times you just rushed into something because it was feeling right. And you was like, I'll be damned, I shouldn't have done that. But at the time I thought it was okay because we are such emotional creatures. We just want to experience the good without thinking about the bad. And I'll be honest, when a person seems right, whether it's a friend or a work peer or a romantic relationship, families are a whole nother dynamics. That's why there's family counselors, because that's something that can be so rigorous within families. But we want to trust. And this is why, hello, I love it. Obviously, I hit something with Dickerson Patrick. He said, hands up. You must have thought about an incident you had or a situation with somebody. Welcome, Vernon Fairley, who follows Maya through her many endeavors. I appreciate your support. He says, yeah, get up all in it. Yes. But just be honest. Sometimes we just get so emotional. We just dive headfirst into something without really thinking about if it's the right thing to do. Well, they say you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. But sometimes we don't do it because we assign value, respect, understanding, time, energy, and give some things too much emotional and mental space. And I'll be honest, if someone gets their emotional hooks into you, then you're in trouble. Because once somebody connects with you on that emotional level, there tends to be a need to want to reciprocate or allow it to flow. And if you really don't know the person that you're dealing with, that can be really dangerous. And this is why understanding the value of relationships is so important. And this is why this real talk time moment really had to be had. Because I can't tell you how easy it is to fall into something because you gave it more value than you ever should have. So the question stands. In some situations, do you value the person and why? Or do you value the relationship more and why? And it's interesting because someone's like, well, how can you value the relationship and not the person? This is not true. There's definitely the part of the human nature that can seek reward without having to put much work into it. Let's be honest, it exists. And how many times have you heard a person say something like this? I am a friend with this person, not because I particularly care for them, but I benefit from the friendship of being within their circle. They don't value the person. They value what that person brings to the table. Let's be honest. In the dating world, you may date someone purely because of what they are, not who they are. So you may look at appearance and be like, she's beautiful. She's got a banging body. I just love this. It works with my attraction factor. Attraction makes people do crazy things and it can be fatal. It doesn't mean you even know what kind of person she is. And how often is it that a person got to know what kind of person that woman was? And they're like, I don't particularly care for them. We have nothing in common. Or why you're like, not exactly, we're not connecting mentally because you didn't care about that because it's what they were, not who they were that mattered. Vice versa, I'm not gonna criticize men because the same thing applies to women. A woman will often date a man for maybe what he has and not who he is, and then she comes to know who he is and find that she doesn't particularly care. But the value wasn't in him, is in what he had. So when I say, where do you assign value in your relationships, it's important to know where you stand. Do you value the actual person? Do you accept who they are and what they are? Or do you value what that relationship does for you? So many times in the beginning of, let's say, romantic relationships, everything is like top notch. They're saying the right thing. They're treating the way you want. They're feeding to and leading with the right foot. See, this is why I always like say that the initial few months of dating, like people say the first 3 months, the honeymoon phase, is not what you should base your relationship on. You have to go a little bit deeper and get into the stretch to see what a person's like. Because do they maintain the respect they showed you and the time they gave you in the beginning of the relationship versus the middle or the end? Not the end, or towards, as you get further into it. And these are the things that people never think about because they get absorbed into the initial part of the relationship and instantly give it value. And so what they think they come to know of a person, they assume that is what they are or who they are and give it a high value, only to find maybe it wasn't the right decision. Now, we don't have crystal balls. So I'll be honest, we can't sit here and always figure everything out. Vernon Fairley weighs in and says, exactly, I'm glad that this is coming from a woman because if otherwise, if a man said it, we'd be the baby canceled. Okay, let me say this. The baby was out of line. Look, folks, you got to know your filters in this world. It's just real talk. You just can't be spouting off like that and think it's okay. And it was offensive. And you know what? Let's be honest. If somebody said something like that about Black people or about women, we'd be all in our feelings about it. So if someone happens to be from that community, they have every right to be in their feelings about it because it was inappropriate. Oh my God, I'm a little nervous. Yanni Brown is tuned in. I love her. You guys should check her out. Making Love Better. Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Yanni. I appreciate you tuning in. But it's important to understand where you assign value. But I always say, if you don't know you and if you don't know your values, then you tend to assign your values all over the place. Here's something I want you to think strongly about. It's possible to desire something more for what it is than what it does. And as I said earlier, there's often this desire to have what we want fulfilled before getting what we need. And all of a sudden, when we realize that needs cannot be fulfilled, because here's what's more important. If a person can give you what you want, kudos, hands up. But I need you to give me what I need because it's the needs that really are important. And the problem in most relationships, whether it be in friendships, family relationships, because people will take you for granted, even in family relationships, if someone can't give you what you need, now you have a deficit. And that deficit will grow over time because needs are important. Needs are like air. Without it, air, you can't breathe. And that's how you have to really prioritize things in your respective relationships. But I also want you to be mindful about something. Here's some food for thought. I always say that intention is one of those things that should be in your M.A.Y.A toolbox as well. But what is intention? Remember, it's that act or actions, whether it be present or in the future, that involves with a person where what you're planning to do or what your forethought about them is. So let's say, for instance, a lot of people you will hear say, I date with purpose, which means when they maybe begin to know someone, their plan is to date you with probably the intention to have a relationship. Their forethought is, I'm looking to find someone to date. Here would be the problem. If you give value to someone who clearly looks at you and says, I'm not looking for a serious relationship, but you never know what might happen. Then you run the risk of putting yourself in a difficult relationship because you were taking something that you valued and wanting a serious relationship with someone, and you tried to match it where there was no match. But they said what you needed to hear, and because there was probably something else about them that you liked, you figured you'd put your toe in the water and didn't expect to get pushed in. And that's where people have to be accountable about the decisions that they make. Terrence Moore chimes in the show. I've expressed this, and I was torn to continue being her friend or even speaking to her. Well, here's, you should listen to the apology one from last week. That episode was about apologies, but it had a lot of nuggets about dealing with people. You have to, I know this is going to sound selfish, Terrence, and I would tell people this. You have to ultimately do, when we're talking about romantic relationships, you ultimately have to do what's best for you. Now, what that doesn't mean is that you should do things with the intention of hurting others. But I also think that it's really important to be honest about where you're coming from. Where do your values sit? And if you and somebody else don't sit in the same place, that doesn't mean you have to be identical or mirrors. But I have this big thing about, especially in relationships, whether it be friendships, which I learned the hard way, whether it be romantic relationships, which I always feel like I'm an epic failure at. Because sometimes I feel like I'm trying to be honest with people who just aren't ready for honesty. But then I tell myself, but Maya, you did the right thing. It comes down to, if you have to meet someone where they're at, and I say this a lot, but you got to take 10 steps back to do it. You got to ask yourself, is that the journey you're trying to make? Here's a good thing about dating and getting to know people, or even making friendships. This just happened to me. And I said, this is good. I'm glad this had it. And I walked away going, you know something? I'm glad I didn't invest time. Because prior to this conversation, he had said to me, well, when are we actually going to meet? We were talking about something. And I said, if everyone knows me, I said, dancing is very therapeutic to me. It's like the Holy Ghost. It just moves me. And he goes, wait. Can I just tell you something? He's like, please don't say that. He goes, dancing is not like the Holy Ghost. I said, what? And he said, the Holy Ghost is, and he got real religious on me. Right there in that context, I realized I have a person who is religious, though he said he wasn't, because he started quoting scripture to me. And I am a spiritual person. I also had mentioned I practice Buddhism, which is not a religion, it's a philosophy. He went on to make a comment and added Buddhism in the religious conversation. And at that point, I realized we weren't a match. But what's weird is, up until that point, we aligned in some key areas. But I didn't like the way that he told me how to express myself. And I said, you really misunderstood what I said. I didn't say that dancing, it was the Holy Ghost. I said, it gives me that feeling of joy and happiness and fulfillment. I said, and that doesn't always mean that it has to be something that's tied to God. God gives you the ability to experience life on so many levels. That was a little too much for him. And I said, you know something? And I didn't have any remorse when I said this. I said, I don't think we're a match. I said, I think my energy is someplace different than yours. And that's not wrong. But I think if it starts here, it's going to probably proliferate somewhere else. And we both agreed. And that was that. And here was the thing. I didn't overspend time. But I also was able to express something that had value to me, and I didn't diminish it because that person just couldn't get on the same page as me. Zon Pickens, tied into the show. Is that the journey you're trying to make? 8 important words. I don't know exactly what that means, Zon. You're going to have to kind of give me a little bit more kind of information on what that means. And don't be winking at me at the end of stuff that don't make no sense. But anyways, I'm sure you'll chime in and tell me a bit more what that means. Okay, but this is the real talk time part of the show that I think is really important. So we're going to take a quick break so I can hydrate, get some other things ready for the second part of the show. And we come back, we're going to talk about ways to identify what you value, so then you understand where you're moving with this, and how to prioritize those within your respective relationships, because it's really important to truly, truly understand that. You're tuned into Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 49, working our way towards 50, which I'm really proud of. I've been consistent, but the key thing is assigning value to your relationships, something I can't tell you how much and how important it truly is to understand. Sit tight, everyone, and I'll be right back.
Please stop and listen, because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
You may not realize it, but these words, often used to describe someone with a mental health condition, can be very harmful. In a country where 1 in 5 people are affected by a mental health condition, it's time for all of us to step up and change the conversation. Just because someone's struggle isn't obvious on the outside doesn't mean they aren't hurting on the inside. We need to see the person, not the condition. Join with me, pledge to be stigma-free.
It's okay to think you're in a toxic relationship with the world right now.
It's okay to feel like your world is changing.
It's okay if it's hard to find the words to express how you feel.
It's okay to feel like you just want to become someone else.
It's okay if you're panicking over an inability to control your life right now.
It's okay to have trouble maintaining your normal routine while staying home.
It's okay if you're feeling more cynical than usual.
It's okay if you want to curse more than you usually do.
It's okay to wear your favorite tank top several days in a row.
It's okay to miss your job.
It's okay to just stay quiet.
It's okay to be depressed.
It's okay to talk to your cats like they understand what you're saying.
It's okay not to feel the most fabulous right now.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
Welcome back, everybody. A little shameless self-promotion right there at the end. And it is absolutely okay to talk like to your cats like they understand. I do it all the time, and I didn't need nobody to tell me that either. And they don't talk back. Well, they do, but that's a different story. Anyways, those were some no promos I'm putting in because I think it's important. I want to normalize the concept and idea of mental wellness because you're hearing people talk about it in dire straits. And like I said earlier, the whole purpose of this podcast is to normalize the idea of mental wellness, just like physical wellness. So if you go to the doctor because you have a reoccurring pain or you do preventative type, appointments, I want everyone to think about their mental health the same way. It doesn't mean when something difficult comes along that it's still not going to be difficult, but your focus, your approach can be different. Remember, part of what's big in your M.A.Y.A toolbox is learning how to respond opposed to how we react. That's what we work on here. So episode 49, assigning value to your relationships. Speaking of toolbox, let's go ahead and have our first toolbox time of the show. And in this episode, we're working on helping you to identify those values and core values and things in your life that are really key. And the thing that I want you to really think about in this is that we're going to actually, in this part, we're going to actually create the discovery process for your value. Because some people are like, they loosely know what they value, but they really don't know. They kind of work on it like just on the fly. I want it to become concrete for you. To be like, I value this, 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 this. I will tell you, I totally value being authentic, having autonomy, accomplishment, and key relationships. And I'm going to tell you why I say key relationships, because for me, it isn't like every family dynamic for me is something I'm in love with. I have some key relationships that have value to me. So for me, I just say key relationships that are a combination of friendships and some family relationships. And that's the thing that are for me. And there is no specific order necessarily, but because I feel like when I'm being the best version of myself, all these things tend to fit into place. So I don't assign value, and I'm not going to tell you you have to either. But for some people, when they're working through the process, it's important to do so. So let's talk a bit about, in this toolbox time, the value discovery process we're going to put together. The first thing I want you to think about when you think about values is I want you to reflect on what matters to you. Then choose what is integral when it happens, happiness. So for instance, like for some people, like I said, and this is where people struggle, work might be a huge, important factor for them. It defines them. I worked with a person that worked, defined who he was, and could not talk or describe himself outside of really his work role. And then he was a father, and he would have said they were equally yoked, and I would say they were. But beyond that, that was what his core value were. And family was there, but his family relationships were very dicey and complicated. And it wasn't like they mattered. I'm talking about family relationships like parents that were older and he had a sibling. But for him, his value was family, meaning his children, because he was divorced, and work. Those were his top things, his energy, his focus, his drive. And anything that was going to negate that was going to be a problem. So he knew exactly where he stood in his value process once we really kind of talked about it. So I want you to reflect on it and say to yourself, so is it family? Is it faith? Is it friendships? Is it work? Is it achievement/accomplishment? Is it contributions? Do you feel like you want to be philanthropic all the time? You feel like you have to make a contribution to the world that makes you feel important. It gives you value. You feel like it gives your life richness. There are some people that are like that. Think about people who give their life to work at the Peace Corps, because for them to make that difference matters. So I would tell you, if someone's doing something of that nature, that's high value, because you're not getting rich working for the Peace Corps. I'm just going to tell you that. So think about it in terms of, is it family, faith, friendship, work, achievement, or accomplishment, contributions to the world, things of that nature? Where does that fall value for you? When I say those, do you instantly, because I know some people that faith leads everything and everything falls behind it. They like God comes first and then family and this. And I've heard people say that. And I say, okay, I'm okay with that, because it's you. And you have a right to put it in that context. What you don't get to do, though, is impose your values on others. That's where people don't know how to draw the line. So if you can find those areas that matter to you, then I want you to prioritize that value. Is it work? Is it family? And go accordingly. Like I said, for me, I'm flexible, because I feel like I kind of spread things in an equal way for balance. I'm big on balance. But for some people, before you can get to the striking the balance piece, they have to work on what matters, why it matters, and making sure that it's playing that role before they can kind of say, now I can spread it out. Because if you try to do too much in this process, you may spread yourself out too thin, or maybe you've already doing that. Thank you for chiming in. Terrence Morris said that I value the most space in his space and his family. And I would tell you that saying you value your space, there's nothing wrong with that, because that's about autonomy and things of that nature. And some people struggle when someone says, or they don't know how to say to somebody, especially if they're in romantic relationships, there is absolutely nothing about you, but I kind of just like my personal space. So I don't feel like in my relationships, I have to be with someone every waking moment. And some people take exception to that. You know why? Because they value the time and want more of it with the person they're with. So then you have to ask yourself, is this someone I can be with? Can I make that adjustment if space is a high value for you? And those are small little nuances that people often don't think about until they kind of hit or bump heads on something. But I want you to prioritize the value for you. Is it work? Is it family? So on and so forth. Is it faith? And once you've done that, if you say, for me, my family's first, it's my faith first, then I want you to be able to articulate that and say, it is my faith that matters to me because of this. Write it down. I want you to be able to visualize that. I am this. This is a thing that drives me. And don't say it in things like, and I'm not being critical, I'm just being honest. Don't please say things like, I'm gonna put it in God's hands. I'm gonna let God take care of that. I hate to tell you this, folks, pretty much God is, yes, in your corner and his support and all those things you need, but it doesn't mean there's still not a certain amount of accountability that you have to have in your life. But a lot of people think that way. God will provide. And I say, okay. It's not for me to challenge it. I just say, okay. And in some instances, people feel it has worked out that way. It may have taken longer and they were patient, but it is what it is. But what I think is interesting, many of those people haven't also taken the time to look at the work they actually had put in to get to where they were, with a supportive feeling that things would fall in the right place within God's favor. It's about perspective. But again, I don't counsel people from a religious perspective. And I would often say, when I get people who say that to me and they'll say, are you a religious person? I kind of hate that question. I was like, God, I'm going to feel like a heathen when I answer this. And I say, I'm a spiritual person. I said, I do believe that there's an order to things, and I do believe in higher powers and things of that nature. I said, but beyond that, I just have some different thoughts. And then it comes into, well, do you believe in God? I said, that's a different conversation. I'm not saying I don't believe in God. I just have some different thoughts on things. But that's not why you're here. I said, I am a person that believes in faith and all those different things. I said, but just how I feel about it, it's a little different. I said, but if that's a problem, I understand. I have to respect if you need me to be like this spiritual person through your counseling, I'm probably not the right counselor for you. I have to be very honest. It's not that I won't listen and I will not meet you where you're at with that, but my answers to you are not going to be related to faith. And some people can totally respect that and say, okay. And others are like, can I think about it? I'm like, you absolutely can. And I will not be offended whatever your decision is, because I'm not here to counsel you from a faith-based perspective. There are people who do that. They counsel from a faith-based perspective, totally. So not necessarily me, but we can have that conversation within counseling. But once you prioritize that value, work, faith, family, I then want you to be able to articulate it, write it down, visualize it, what that relationship should look like. So if you say it's work, what does that mean for you? What makes it value? Is it because it makes you feel accomplished, achieve? Is it the money? Like, why does it have value to you? This is where purpose and function might come back into play. Ask yourself those questions. Now, what's more important once you put something in its assigned value in the process, there's something I want you to do. I want you to ask yourself, are you getting what you need first in that high value relationship because you've put it first? And is there any part of your want being addressed, or do you foresee that can happen? If the answer is yes, great, the relationship has balance. But if it's no, you're not getting what you need, then my next question is, one, why is it a high value relationship? And two, why are you still there? And a lot of times the answer I get, it's more about the person and not what the person brings to the table. And it's interesting. Some people feel like they're pigeonholed to be in relationships and hence give it high value. Family dynamics are often like this because here's the thing. We don't get to pick who's our family. It's divine order. You just get it. And if you're lucky, you end in a family where it's healthy and happy, and there can be some hiccups here and there, but overall it's more nurturing than it's been difficult. On the flip side, if it's the opposite and you ended up in a very toxic family dynamic and there was no nurture to it, and it was a detriment to your development, and now that you're adult, you have created space between you and your family, you have done no wrong. You realize that just because something is supposed to have value because the word family and parent is considered to be valuable, it didn't meet what you needed nor expectations. So hence you removed it from being a high value relationship. That's how you process that. And it's not wrong, especially if it's not healthy for you. And a lot of people really struggle with that when they have to step back from friendships or from family relationships because they realize it's not healthy and it's something that they have to put on a back burner because it's not good for them. They feel guilty because they feel obligated because these are relationships that we are supposed to facilitate and work through. Family dynamics are very complicated, and it's a journey that's often difficult for people. So when I say that, we have the value discovery process. Let's have another real talk time, our second one of the show. I would ask you this. Do you value some relationships more than your counterparts that you're in with? And if so, do you think they know that? And if you don't know, then you need to explore why you make it a high value relationship. So what that ultimately means is this. If you are in a friendship and you value a person's opinion, you trust them, you respect them, all those things, but you do not feel you get that back from them, I would ask you why you would continue to engage that particular relationship. Because you have to ask yourself this question. If you respect, trust, and revere someone, and if we throw the word love in there, because let's say it's that dynamic to it, but you don't feel the person you're in that friendship or relationship with feels the same way, why would you continue to be there? And that gets back to, is it more about the person and less about what you get from it? And this is when you assign high value relationships. It's so important to understand why you assign them. So let's talk about high value. And that's a word that's been tossed around a lot lately. I think it's interesting. High value this, high value that. Well, relationships have value. Like I remember said, there's levels to them too. So don't try to assign a high level role to a low level relationship. If it's not there yet, don't rush the process. Let it go as it may. So let's talk about high value relationships, what they should look like, feel like, etc. Here's the thing a couple of things I want you to think about when you think about, what's high value relationships? One, I want you to think about, does a relationship garner mutual trust, respect, and or love, if that's applicable? Because there's different types of loves. I mean, so you have to determine when I say love what that means. If it's a romantic relationship, then that's a different type of love. If it's a friendship, there's still love there. We love our friends. So either way, in most relationships, the only place there may not be love, if it's maybe a work relationship, there may be no love. You may, unless it's the job you're in love with, that might be different. But generally speaking, love kind of applies more to those romantic, family, friendships, those kind of things. But what's important when you think about, does it garner that mutual trust, respect, and love, is establishing this up front, or by the way, taking its temperature periodically is important, because it helps you to establish what's best for the relationship, and you just don't lay into your own personal interest. So neutrality is important, because if you mutually trust each other, if you mutually respect each other, and love can be a little not exactly striking the same balance all the time, but you're never moving into this relationship with selfish intent. Now, I'm going to tell you this. It does not mean that we often don't have self-interest in relationships. Probably the reason you entered into one was a value that maybe you had someone else didn't have. Hence, that would be self-interest. But all self-interest are not negative. Let me make that very clear. You could have a self-interest that you're looking for a relationship that is honest, respectful, that is supportive. That's self-interest. That's positive, because you're looking to yield things from a relationship that are good for you, hence can be good for the other person, because you're going to reciprocate that. So just understand, when we talk about self-interest, it's not always a negative thing. We make it into a negative thing because we don't assign what we mean when we say self-interest. Something else that I want you to think about is, and this is interesting, because most people will probably tell you this is probably where they had a hiccup along the way in some of their relationships. Within a relationship, where it's a friendship, romantic, whatever, or you choose a job, do you actually share common values and beliefs about what's important? So do you work for a company that has core values, their mission statement really aligns for what you think is good? But more importantly, within that mission statement at that job, do they act and serve in a way that aligns with what they say they're trying to do? That's when you think about work relationships. It's like, okay, I like the core values of what's here. I like this employee culture. But if you find that what you're seeing at work doesn't align, you got to ask yourself, okay, I value work so importantly. I love my job. This is what I do. But where I'm at is not the right fit. This is not good. So often you'll find when people hit this obstacle or this fork in the road, because I've heard many people say, I love my job, but I hate this job. Seriously, you have to ask yourself that question. Like, maybe this is not where I'm supposed to be, because though I love what I do, I don't like where I'm doing it at. And I need to make a decision if this is where I should stay. And if it's not where I should stay, then I need to figure out where I'm going. Remember, the grass is not always greener, and cultures and companies are very delicate. It's an ecosystem that's, you could think to be great initially. And I'm gonna tell you something. You can tell when people are not aligning with the value of a job, because you see it in their work performance. You see it in the culture. You hear in their conversations, the unhappiness, the disgust. When you see that in the workplace repetitive, it means that there's a low value for that job, but they're there for the purpose for me to make money, and the function is so I can pay my bills. And that's not healthy for your existence. I can't tell you how many people are so stressed out of their jobs that they're just not happy where they're at, even though they may like what they do. But it's the dollar, the purpose for why they're there, is why they stay as long as they do. In relationships that are romantic or friendships, it's the same thing. Do you share common values and belief systems? So let's be honest, if you're a person that doesn't like, if you make friends with somebody, and there's, like I said, there's levels to friendship. So say you're a person who likes to go out, be active, do things. Let's say maybe you like to go to wine tastings, you like to go to live concerts, and you have another person that's just not their cup of tea. You don't have common interests. So maybe that friend is not someone you're gonna do certain things with, and you have to be mindful if it doesn't align, maybe you shouldn't be including them in things that doesn't work for them, because they may not like it. They may not tell you that. But you got to be mindful. Do you have similar interests, and more importantly, beliefs? So do you believe that honesty and trust and respect are important? Here's a big one in friendships, and even within romantic relationships. Do you understand the value of communication? Can you express to me when you are unhappy as much as you can express to me when there's discontent? I always say this about people. People in an argument will come at you 100 miles per hour when they're angry or you've done something to upset them. Seriously. They don't know how to do it until, like the levee breaks, their emotional levee breaks. And then all of a sudden they can come at you like full speed. They don't know how to communicate that to you in the moment when they're unhappy. On the other hand, people can often express their happiness because maybe you don't have to say, I'm really happy right now, or I love you. You can tell in their body language. The nonverbal cues tell you where they're at. So you feel like things are good. You also can read nonverbal cues when people are not happy. But the sad part is, if you have to look at somebody and say, is everything okay? And then all of a sudden you find out something isn't okay. That's a dynamic within your relationship. If it's a high value relationship that you do value and you don't want to be in, you have to be able to say, I want us to have better communication, because I had no idea this was bothering you until I saw your nonverbal cues, your body language. Up until this point, I didn't know anything was wrong. So now you're telling me that this has bothered you for this long period of time, but you've never bothered to tell me until this moment. If you value a relationship, you'll have that conversation. You will, if it's high value. Now, if you're getting this and you're like, then you know what to do with it. I'm not telling you. You just know what to do with it. Something else I want you to consider, where this is applicable. I'm just going to say this. Do you share also beyond common values and beliefs? Do you share common goals and interests? I'm going to tell you this. If you enter into a working relationship and you don't have a common goal or interest, okay, then you might just be there for the check. But hopefully you've taken a job where you feel like the objective of this is this. And this is why many people come to believe and understand that entrepreneurship is their path, because now I'm aligning with my goals and my interests, and I don't have to modify them to fit someone else's. This is why I believe that entrepreneurs are growing like beautiful flowers, because people finally realize I got to try to stop matching my energy in a place where there is no energy like mine. That's something else. Knowing your energy is huge. And you got to be careful, because some people will come in and take your energy away or suck it off. And you'll be like, whoa, hold up, stop, wait a minute. This isn't a goal or interest that I had. Where did this come from? And people are often very quick to try to project onto you what their goals or interests are. So it's really important, especially within work dynamics, friendships, that you have similar goals and interests, because you tend to move in concert with people when you are similar or have interest. Versus, even though diversity is great, I'm gonna tell you this, some of the best friendships I have with people, or even some relationships, is when we had different opinions and interests. To me, it makes for a richer life. But what I'm saying is, at the base of it, there has to be a common goal and a common interest that draws you in. For instance, okay, it's okay to be a Cub fan. I'm a Sox fan. I'll live with that. But I'm serious. But if the example I gave earlier, if you are a very religious person and you go to church every single Sunday, which is not me, we're probably not going to resonate, because at some point you're going to take exception with the fact that you're going to ask me to go to church, and I'm going to say, I might go once to appease you, but that was the wrong reason to go. So then I have to tell you that I'm only going because you asked me this one time, but you know this is not really my thing. But I'll go with you if this is something you really want me to do this time. But I don't want to create this expectation that this is something I'm going to be doing all the time. People either will love you for that response, or they will hate you and they will let you go. So that's what I'm saying about common goals and interests, things like that. For instance, are you a person who likes to go out and maybe have a drink, and you may have a person who's a non-drinker, and they may absolutely take exception to that. Like, I don't like when people drink. Well, you probably shouldn't be together, because you already are not working from the same point of interest. So, I mean, you don't have to be 100%, but get down to the core of what really matters to people when you talk about goals and interests. You can have some other stuff that's totally independent that you can share, but at some point you have to have some similarities at work. And that, because the thing about that commonality is, when you find a person where you have similar goals and interests, it creates, and understand this, write this down. Like any of you have a piece of paper and pencil, like I told you in the beginning, but that's not rather here nor there. Common goals and interests become the foundation for support and encouragement. When you share something with someone and it's similar, they tend to be able to support you more and encourage you, because they understand where that interest and where your, kind of where your focus is. It doesn't mean a person still can't be that way. But especially when you can align that way, I would tell you this becomes really important in relationship goals, like romantic relationships or even marriages. I honestly, this is, You can totally disagree with me. I'm okay with this. But this applies to even new relationships. You totally cannot be opposites like 100% and think it's going to work, because how many times a person kind of been a wallflower and the other person was outgoing and it didn't work because the other person was like, let's go do this. Let's do that. Like, I want to travel. And someone's like, I can't even get on a plane. You see what I'm saying? So the person who wants to be the free spirit, here's another great example. Have you ever saw a couple where one person was very outgoing and they were like a social magnet? So they come into a room, or let's say they're popular. So they go to a place and people are like, hey, how you doing, Maya? What's up? How you doing? Give you a hug. It might be men and women. And the person they're with is standing behind them like feeling really uncomfortable. And the problem is the person that they're with is like, oh my God, hey, how are you? Giving a hug, how you been? And they're interacting. And then all of a sudden it's, or the too flirtatious person that you date. Here's the thing. You gotta know that if you have a person who's like that, that you're okay with that. But also, if you're not a social person, don't go date a social person, because where will become an issue is they'll be going places and you'll be sitting at home. Common goals and interests, common marriage goals. If your goal when you find somebody is, I want to settle down, I want to have 2.5 kids. I have no idea what that means when people say it. I want this, I want that. I'm all about family. But let's just say you want to be with a woman who doesn't want to give up her career. She's doing really well. Are you okay with that? These are the conversations that have to happen before you give something a high value relationship, to make sure this is really the right fit. And that last thing I would tell you, shared experiences, please don't, they're not required. But a shared background really does provide for understanding and communication. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be exactly the same person. It doesn't mean you have to be the same race. That's not the same nationality, any of that stuff. But commonality, at least in regards to a shared background. So let's say you're both professional people. So you can appreciate a person might have a crazy or hectic work schedule. Let's just say, and this is a big one. Let's just say you're a person and family matters to you, and that family matters to that person too. So you both make time and energy to, bring your families into your relationships, versus you may have a person who doesn't have close family connections and they don't particularly care for the whole family environment. So shared experiences, whether it be family relationships, even upbringings. Let's say you come from a 2-parent home versus a single parent home, and one is not better than the other, because I've known people come from 2-parent homes are just as messed up as anybody else, seriously. But let's just say that your experience in your single family home was more nurturing. I'm gonna do the flip of this, was more nurturing and involved versus the person you're with. So maybe you guys can't connect on the same dots because it's different. I'll tell you one of my interesting connections with, I noticed years ago with my friends who came from 2-parent homes and I came from a single family home, even though I had a relationship with my dad. I always find that my friends, I swear to God, this is my deficit. I do. I know it is. I feel that my friends who legitimately grew up with fathers are way better with men than I am. Real talk. They just seem to have this sense of connecting in a way that I think I don't, because the problem is my connection with men were always very friend-based. I had uncles. I had good relationships with people. But for me, I see men differently. And then I was a tomboy growing up. And so I was like, hey, bro, what's up? So I struggle with me, and my connection with men is a little weird. But I always feel that my friends who had fathers always do better than I do. And I don't think it makes me deficient in some way. I just found that their interactions were a bit different, and how they kind of did the male approach, and even how they kind of approach men or deal with men in relationships. And I also found that the way they understood the working orders of relationships, being around both their parents. I mean, and I'm speaking to people who had healthy relationships, by the way, not perfect, just relatively healthy. I clearly found over time that they had a better understanding of relationship dynamics romantically than I did, because I didn't grow up seeing that necessarily. But over time, when I realized that I had this strange quirk, I began to work on it. And after I was married only once and failed only once, I totally figured it out. But anyways, it's important to know that shared experiences can add a richness to your overall valued relationships. So, with that being said, final thoughts. I want you to know that value helps you to keep an eye, knowing what's value to you and where you place things. helps you to know if what you need, because needs are important in the value system, in a relationship is being met, or if it's a work in progress. Either way, everything doesn't have to be instantaneous in relationships. That's the other thing people have to learn. Let it breathe. It's like a good bottle of wine. Open it up, let it breathe, because the flavor is good. You make chili. It's better the day after, 2 days later, than the first day that you made it. And that's from a person who can't cook shit. Seriously. But I'm just saying, even I've learned some things about letting things marinate a little bit and letting it kind of unfold, how much better they can be. But the key thing is knowing what you value will help you to prioritize where you place your time and energy. And be honest. If what you value in one relationship creates conflict in another, be able to address it. And this is my final thought with this, because I see this a lot. If you are a person that values your job, you love it, you're committed to it, you spend more time at work than you do with your family, and it creates issues with your family, you have to acknowledge that. Because in a way, I need you first to say you might be prioritizing your job over your family. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, because maybe accomplishment and achievement is fulfillment for you, and your job brings that to you in a different way than does your family. And it doesn't mean you love your family less or it doesn't bring you value. It's just how you see it's different. And you may say, well, this is how I provide, unless you're being forced at work and you don't have any choice. But if you're making the choice to be at work than more with your family, you have to ask yourself why, and what's the cost that you're doing it for, and make the adjustments accordingly. So if your family matters to you, you don't lose it because you refuse to acknowledge how much you maybe liked your job. On the flip side, if family is really important to you and the job creates conflict, you have to figure out a way to make it work. And it's never easy. And this is where people have a lot of stressors and trying to navigate these waters. Hello, Ada, how are you? Good to see you tuning to the show. Thank you. I'm glad that this can resonate with people. She said, I needed to hear all of this, having sibling issues. Oh, sibling issues run deep for people. Can I just tell you that? The family dynamics, and understand, and your family is usually the foundation of how you got to where you are. But it's important to take time to reconcile those relationships in a way that makes sense to you emotionally and mentally. And when you do that, it doesn't mean that you can make everybody happy in that reconciliation process, because you're doing it with you. And the other thing I always tell people, especially in sessions, is I need you to understand something. If part of you being able to move forward in relationships is forgiveness of others, you're going to have to rethink that, because one, apology may never come. Go listen to episode 48, by the way, The Art of the Apology. It creates some key understanding. You may never be able to get an apology from them. And two, they may not be in a place in their life to be even able to give you the forgiveness that you need. So it's interesting. That's why I say, knowing of yourself is the beginning of all wisdoms, and the peace you find when you reconcile any discontent you have with yourself will make any other relationship so much richer. But just know this, all relationships are not created equal. And it's important for you to know that you should not attempt to make them that way. Assign value where it's appropriate and know the levels to them, and make sure you don't make something more than what it is, because we're responding and not reacting. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, listening to this episode. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast, My Ambition, Your Ambition, is to help you identify your ambitions and harness that happiness, that's going to help you to get that motivation that you can get the success and happiness you seek in your everyday life. We're about being everyday happy. We're about being the everyday best versions of ourselves here. So remember, you can always find past episodes and current episodes of Maya at M.A.Y.A.com. Remember, there will be a podcast companion for this. 2 things I would encourage you to read. And that value process, I actually have some worksheets to go through that will really help you to flesh out. If you don't know what you value or why you value it, go do the exercise. So just go to M.A.Y.A.com, click on the podcast resource. Episode 49 is right there at the top. Click on the second link and go through and do the work. You can print them out. It's a PDF. It's part of the website, and kind of start to really truly make your values concrete, so then you apply them in your relationships accordingly, because that's what most people truly don't understand. You have to apply them accordingly. So remember, you can drop me a virtual letter, say something, respectfully in this with something that really piqued your interest. Remember, you can always send me that virtual letter to Maya's mailbag. Just go to Send me an email to getinspired@maya.com. So whether it's about this episode or maybe a past episode made you think about something. And if you say something that I think, man, this is really worthy of me diving a little bit deeper into with somebody because they brought something up that I think is really worth, if they're thinking it, who else isn't thinking it too? So go ahead and shoot me a virtual letter to getinspired@maya.com. Remember past episodes, maya.com, but then Google, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify, all those podcast platforms. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Subscribe, like, and share. Make sure you do that with my YouTube page as well. Just go and search M.A.Y.A, and you can then just like, subscribe, and share there as well. All right, everybody. Like I said, thank you for tuning in. And as I always close my show with, and I hope by now it totally makes sense, remember, your present becomes your past, and that future is no more. So make the most of every single day. Be well, stay safe, but more importantly, continue to be absolutely amazing. I'll see you all next week. Ciao.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.